This is our second session of Soccer 101, and this is a really special one. Not to take anything away from Bez and Pat, but their credentials aren't quite what we have today with our guests Howard Webb and Mark Geiger. And you all probably have seen their bios, and I'll let them go into their bios a little bit. But when it comes to officiating, refereeing, and it pains me to say this as a player, I mean, these guys are like the pinnacle of refereeing. So before we even get into it, Howard and Mark, thank you so much for taking time and agreeing to walk our folks through. Well, with that, I will turn it over to Howard and Mark to walk us through officiating and laws of the game. Howard and Mark.
Thank you for having Howard and myself here. What we're planning on doing is talking about a lot of officiating issues. We'll be talking about a little bit about laws of the game, talk about what it's like being a referee, what it is to be a referee and pro. So there's a lot of content here. We're going to scratch the surface to kind of make it interesting to hopefully everyone that's on the call, no matter what your position is within Columbus Crew. And I know Dante sent out our bios, but we're kind of going to introduce ourselves a little bit. And we're going to introduce each other. So I'm going to start with Howard Webb. At Pro, we're really, really fortunate to have somebody of Howard's caliber leading Pro. He started his career as a police officer, but also refereeing starting in 1989. He's one of the most recognizable referees around the world. I don't know. Kalina is another recognizable one, so I don't know if it's a shaved head sort of thing or not, but certainly one of the most recognizable referees, both for his quality and for his look on the field. He came up through the English Premier League, refereeing there from 2003 to 2014 in England. You look at his resume and you look at the tournaments that he has participated in, it really doesn't get much better than this. 2008, 2012 European Championships, you have Champions League final in 2010, 2 World Cups, 2 Confederations Cups. So the quality that he's bringing and the experience that he brings to Pro and to the referees that we have here for MLS is second to none. When you talk about a referee's career, we're defined many times by a few notable experiences, and really Howard's highlight came in 2010 when he was assigned not just one big final but 2 big finals from around the world. Right, the first one is the Champions League final in 2010 for UEFA between Bayern Munich and Inter Milan. And then also that year, he refereed the World Cup final between Spain and Netherlands. All right, so great testament to his ability and his work throughout his entire career, and specifically in that year. Unfortunately, not like players. Players can have a rough game for 89 minutes and then score the game winner, and that's what everyone remembers. For the referee world, it's the complete opposite. We could be having a great game for 89 minutes and then have one decision that has controversy or a lot of talk to it, or a wrong decision, and that's what everyone remembers. And referees know that when they get into this. But on the flip side, in addition to these 2 things, really one of the things that Howard is remembered for is the incident in the 2010 World Cup final where we had this contact by De Jong from the Netherlands. And I don't want to say it defines our career, but I'll let Howard talk about this incident right now and kind of take us through it a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay as well?
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Well, thanks for this opportunity. Really so great to have a chance to speak to staff from a club. Columbus Crew is actually a club that is close to my heart in some respects, because my very first ever MLS game that I saw was Orlando City against Columbus Crew. I was on vacation in Orlando. We said, let's go to a game. We did, and my son took a liking to Columbus, and when we got back home, ordered a shirt online, and has still got it at home. So there you go. You wouldn't have expected that, would you? But yeah. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Mark. Thanks for raising this particular incident in the biggest game of my career. Something I had to have counselling for weeks and weeks afterwards. People couldn't understand why on earth a referee of allegedly my quality wouldn't see this as a red card. in a World Cup final because I didn't send off Nigel de Jong, the player in orange there, playing for the Netherlands. And unfortunately, it's the one situation that kind of like gets mentioned to me or asked of me more than any other. Why did you not send him off? Was it because it was the World Cup final? We are told by FIFA, don't send players off in the final, that will ruin the game. Well, nothing of that happened before the game. I simply just didn't really have a very good viewing angle, and I knew that De Jong was late with his challenge, but of course I didn't see what you can see now with this contact to the chest of Xabi Alonso from Spain. I just saw him sort of like collide late, reckless action. I thought it was a yellow card. And to be fair, World Cup final, I needed some certainty to put a team down to 10 men because you're going to change the game. So without that level of certainty, not even with a strong gut feeling, sometimes you have to work from your gut feeling as a referee. I decided to show a yellow card, and only later did I see that image and realise at that point that the introduction of video review, VAR, would have helped me massively. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in today's talk. So thanks for the introduction, Mark. I am Mark's boss, so he had to be nice about me. Mark, if you can control the screen for me, because you've got the presentation. So Mark Geiger, my Director of Senior Match Officials. I think since I came to the US back in 2017 to be part of the implementation of VAR and then to become General Manager, I think my best decision was to bring Mark Geiger into my management team. It's a bit like taking a really well-known, established captain of the team and bringing him onto the management team to maintain the ethos, to share the experience, to share the credibility that Mark has got. Because Mark, as you can see, has also got a great resume. MLS Referee of the Year, FIFA referee for many years, been to the Olympics, 4 Club World Cups, to 2 FIFA World Cups, Confederations Cups. So very similar. I worked with him on numerous occasions around the world. He's notable really as being the most successful official to come from the USA ever, and that is evidenced by the next slide, which is Mark taking charge of a knockout game in the World Cup in Brazil in 2014 between France and Nigeria, and this was the first time ever that a referee from the US had taken charge of a knockout game in the FIFA World Cup. And he had a great tournament, better than I did. I remember he got his 3rd game before I got my 2nd. I wasn't liking him too much at that time. But yeah, delivered that game really well. And 2014 was a really significant year for Mark. It showed the world that the USA can produce top quality officials who can perform at the highest level. But our life, a bit like players, coaches, can change fairly quickly, and it's about ups and downs and how you deal with the downs and come back. And only a year later, in Atlanta, at the semi-final of the Gold Cup, Mark was assigned to referee Panama against Mexico, and late in the game, I think time allowed for stoppages at the end of the game, Mexico equalised with a penalty to make it 1-1, and shall we say that the decision was controversial, Mark, wasn't it?
I think a little bit more than that.
It created a reaction from the Panamanian players, including some that you'll know well from MLS, and really this I think this left a scar for Mark, didn't it, Mark? And if you want to just explain a little bit what happened,
yeah,
so people will be interested.
Yeah, and that was very nice because we actually had an 11-minute stoppage after the penalty was whistled before we actually took the penalty. Panama left the field, and rightfully so, they were upset because when I got into the locker room after the game and I was watching the highlights on the TV and they showed the challenge, up to this point, I did not know that I was wrong, but they showed the challenge and my heart just sunk and my stomach sunk, and all I could think of, and I said, that's not what I saw. And we are very sure when we give penalty decisions and we give red cards, we're very sure in what we saw. But in this case, I had a very poor angle, and what I saw was not actually what happened. And for myself, after this, my confidence was low. And just like any player, if a player has confidence, they're going to play extremely well. They're going to hit their passes, they're going to hit their shots, they're going to defend well, they're going to make the saves they need to make. A referee's the same way. So for the next year, actually, I didn't feel like I had my confidence, and I was questioning every single decision that I was making. And there were still big decisions that needed to be made. So it's very important that a referee has that confidence. in order to make those big decisions with conviction and be sure of what they're doing. So this was a game that lived with me for a little while, and even into 2018 World Cup. You have the director of refereeing for FIFA sitting me down and commenting on this game, and trying to say that I've bounced back from it. But it's something that had lived with me for a very long time. And when you think of defining moments, again, this is something that's going to be in the mind of many, many people. So.
And for sure, Mark did bounce back, because Mark's last game at a FIFA World Cup was a wonderful game that England beat Colombia on penalties on. So I was very happy with that particular performance. So we're gonna move on to a few topics. We're going to talk about who we are, who's pro, what part do we play in the North American soccer landscape. We're going to talk you a little bit through the laws of the game, understanding there's a range of knowledge and understanding of the laws of the game on this call, and then also talk a little bit about VAR and some of the things that you might find of interest. So what is pro and who are we? Well, we're a company, the Professional Referee Organisation, a company that's funded by Major League Soccer and US Soccer, and we've only been around for about 8 years, and it's quite an unusual setup. Normally, in most places in the world, refereeing is controlled by the national governing body and only the national governing body. So if you go to Germany, the German Football Federation looks after all officiating at Bundesliga level right the way through. The same in France, for example, and in Mexico. There's a couple of exceptions, and we're one of them. There's also one in England as well, where a company is being created by the federation together with the power and the strength, if you like, of the league to dedicate specific funding and expertise towards officiating. It's a little bit different in soccer than most sports, because if you look at the NFL or MLB, NBA, their officiating is solely controlled by the league. FIFA don't allow that to happen in our sport. FIFA don't want leagues/clubs to control officiating. They see that as problematic in certain parts of the world, which are maybe, more prone to situations that it might involve less honesty, for example, or allegations of that. So they insist that the federation runs refereeing. In our country, not in the USA, it does happen that way, because US Soccer are one of the key players, but also they work in unison with Major League Soccer, and they're our funding partners. We service MLS, of course we do, but we also service other leagues as well. So if you move on to the next slide, Mark, you'll see we also assign officials to the National Women's Soccer League and also the United Soccer League. And we use those in many ways as a development pathway, because our raison d'etre, our reason for being here, is to try to develop the next generation of MLS officials and increasing the quality of existing officials as well. We employ 23 full-time staff, so we're quite a big operation. We also employ some part-time staff, some contractors, and that's not including the officials. So on the next slide, Mark, I think you'll find we've got after this one, we've got the organizational chart. This is just a pyramid of how we come through the different levels. So you'll see here 23 staff, and we try to set ourselves up in a similar way to what a club would. So if you go through these sort of delineations on the chart, on the left there are senior match officials. They work with MLS only officials. So we've got Mark Geiger heading that department. We look after VAR and assistant refereeing as well. Pro 2 is our development pathway. So the staff that are in Pro 2 assign officials to USL and NWSL, looking to polish the next officials to come through to MLS. A lot of coaching goes off in that particular space. And then we've also got a sports science team as well. They're dedicated for ensuring that the officials are prepared physically for the demands of the modern game. The game gets quicker every year. In the last 5 years in MLS alone, high intensity runs, have really doubled in frequency. So we have to be ready and able to deal with those extra demands. So their job is simply to prepare the officials for the pace of the game, also dealing with injury prevention, injury rehab, and that type of thing. Everybody else on that slide is dealing with the administration work. We've got a big country here. We've got a lot of flying to do. We've got a lot of hotels to book. We've got a lot of training camps to prepare. We bring our people together, our referees together every 2 weeks to go through video clips, to train together, to have talks from guest speakers, to talk about tactics and the technical side of the game as well. We have visits from sports psychologists. So we try to replicate what's done at a professional soccer environment, and we try to make sure that when our officials cross that line to take charge of a game, they're as prepared mentally and physically as they possibly can be to deliver a good performance in an environment that's getting more and more demanding all of the time. I think if we move on to the next slide, Mark, we'll have the group of senior officials, which you're going to talk through.
Yeah, so one of the real benefits of Pro in coming in 2012 is we created full-time positions, full-time referees that were able to leave their real job, all right, their full-time job, to focus just on refereeing, all right, because of the camps that we have to attend every 2 to 3 weeks and travel to every 2 to 3 weeks. It wasn't possible in order to have the referees train the way we needed them to train and also maintain another position. So we created full-time referees. As you can see here, we have 26 referees. These are the individuals that you will see on the pitch with the players week in and week out in MLS. In addition to these full-time officials, we also have 46 assistant referees within the senior match official group, 10 dedicated VARs, and 9 dedicated AVARs. The VAR is the video assistant referee, the one that's looking at the replays to see if there's clear and obvious errors, and the AVAR is the assistant VAR, which will be there to help dedicated assistant referees in the past who will help with some offside decisions. We've seen a lot of success within this group, especially within this past year. You look at these individuals, all right, and you have Jair and his team, all right, for the first time refereed the Concacaf Champions League final doing the second leg of the game. All right, and we're seeing a lot of times in the Champions League, it comes down to the final 4 teams. You're seeing mostly Mexican and U.S. teams that make it. So when you do have a final with 2 Mexican teams, it's very difficult for referees from outside of Mexico to break into an assignment. So Jair and his team was able to do that in 2019. We had representation at the FIFA Under-20 World Cup with Ismail Elfath and his team, even Alan Kelly as a VAR as well. Did 4 matches there and actually refereed the final of the Under-20 World Cup. So a huge accomplishment for him and his crew. Going over to the women's side, the FIFA Women's World Cup, we had 3 pros, people from the senior match official group. Katie Nesbitt and Felicia Mariscal are both assistant referees within Pro and in MLS. And Drew Fisher, who's one of our referees, was selected to be a VAR at the Women's World Cup in France. And then finally finishing off last year with the FIFA Club World Cup in Qatar. So this is a competition where the winner of each confederation championship goes and represents their confederation for a world championship. So the team that wins the Concacaf Champions League, which Columbus Crew has an opportunity to play in, those are the teams that qualify for this championship. So Ismail and his crew again selected, including Alan Kelly as a VAR for that championship. So how do we get this group of officials to work with? How do we find the top referees in the United States and Canada to fill our ranks? So the first thing is identification. It's a very difficult landscape, all right, USA and Canada, to find these referees. There are 150,000 referees just in US soccer. And we're talking about the group that we have are the top 26 referees, the top 46 assistant referees from that 150 plus thousand when you add in Canada. So it's a very large landscape. So Alex Pruce in Pro 2 and his crew have to go out to these events and find these referees that show some promise. Once we identify some that we think have some potential, then we have a lot of training and coaching go on. Whether it's online training, in-person training. After each game, these referees have a dedicated coach that they work with, who are primarily former MLS referees themselves, and work with them and try to develop them over the next few years. Each of their games is evaluated, so they do go through a very rigorous evaluation process. And they're given feedback on their performances. And if they're performing consistently well, then there's a possibility that we'll trial them in a Major League Soccer match. Is this you, Howard, or is this you, me?
I think this is
still me. This is still me. Okay, so
great job.
Once the referees make it to Major League Soccer, all right, then obviously they could lose their position at any time. There are a lot of demands on these referees. We do have physical training. The difference between the referee group and a team is that Caleb and his staff are able to meet with the team every single day. They're able to watch them train, monitor their training in real time, and see what's going on. For the referees, we're scattered all over North America. All right, so we rely on, and the sports science team relies on heart rate data, GPS data, and they're emailed or on a platform. They're put their workouts that they need to do every single day. They need to monitor their load. They need to monitor travel schedules, and their daily workouts will change depending on how they're feeling and in what stage of the season they're in. As Howard already indicated, we do have our training camps every 2 to 3 weeks. We will either travel to Dallas during the spring and the fall, or we will go to Minneapolis in the summer. And we have classroom sessions where we discuss the games and the key match incidents from the previous 2 to 3 weeks. We have other sessions where we talk about topics that may have been an issue or trends that we're seeing within the games. And so we'll have education sessions on those. And it also gives the sports science team an actual opportunity to monitor the referees in person and work with them and making sure the technique that they're doing on the track or on the field or in the weight room is the proper way to do things. We also have an online education platform. We have Pro House. All right, we have FIFA House, you have US Soccer House, and now we have Pro House, where referees and assistant referees and Pro 2 and the VARs can go. And this is all of our online education. So we'll have video tests. We'll have managers' reports after matches. We'll have little quizzes or polling of the referees to see what decisions they think should be taken. We train our assessors through this online education as well to make sure that a single message is getting out to all members of Pro. And then finally, matches. So our referees referee on average 20 plus matches a season. You have to understand too that while Columbus Crew has 17 matches at home and 17 matches away, for a referee, every match is an away match. All right, so there's a lot of travel involved, and when you add in the camps that we have as well, just to give you a taste of it, in 2017, when I was still refereeing for FIFA and also doing MLS, I was away 205 days from home. So it becomes very demanding for the referees, especially those that are involved internationally as well.
Mark, so just a little bit of insight as well about how the guys who we employ are evaluated. Mark says obviously they're there mainly to do matches. Of course, you'll see them come into Columbus Crew refereeing games. They're selected by myself and Mark for the game based on their experience levels, based on how well they're officiating at that time, based on how recently they saw the two teams that are competing, based on a range of other metrics such as how far they traveled in the last few weeks. And we try to match the right referee for the right game. There's some science involved, but there's some feel as well. We have to decide who's the right official for that particular game, and we use our experience and knowledge of teams and officials to try to decide who's the best fit. Each game sees each official evaluated, and they are graded across lots of different competencies. The thing that impacts their grading the most are those key match situations, the ones that impact the outcome of the game. Penalty kicks, red cards, for example. They're the ones that carry the most impact for their evaluation, either positively or negatively. And they're all kind of in competition with each other because they all want to get to MLS Cup. They want to get to the playoffs, of course, and there's not enough playoff games now to go around. There's only 13 games that can be allocated to officials. So we see them being pretty competitive, and if they make mistakes, and too many mistakes, then they fall down a relative ranking table. And of course, as Mark says, they're employees, and if their performances don't reach a certain level, then there's some consequences within the CBA that they work within, and ultimately it can cost them their employed status. We have to be we have to be mindful about how we deal with the employed status of our officials, because we're the only employer in town. You know, a player can go to a different club, but a referee can't move to another club. So we try to develop officials, make them better, give them confidence. If we see that they're lacking in confidence, we take them out of the firing line, maybe put them in some lesser profile games in USL, and then bring them back. But ultimately, you know, they've all got a passion for the game. They all want to be the best they can be. But some are just better than others. Some have just got a feel for the game. Some have just got an understanding how to manage people, and those things are reflected in the evaluation process, and that impacts ultimately their assignments as well. And they are paid a salary, but they're also paid a match fee, so they get paid per game. So the more games you do, the more you earn, and the happier everybody is in that respect back at home. I'm just looking at some of the questions. Mark, if you want to talk about laws of the game, and then we'll answer some of these questions that are coming on.
I'll just these two questions really quickly. In the beginning of the season, all the referees do have to take a fitness test. FIFA has a standard for all national associations as to what fitness standard they need to pass in order to be eligible to referee matches. So all of our referees that you see on the field have passed their fitness test, and then after they've passed, and their training is monitored by the fitness instructors, all right, and the sports science team. So if we see a referee that is not performing in a game and their fitness is not up to standard, then they just don't receive matches. All right, it's that simple as that. It is a very competitive environment. You know, there are 13 games on a weekend, but there's 26 referees. You know, so if you're not performing and you're not up to the fitness standards that we expect, then you're not going to see as many assignments, or you may not see any assignments at all. As far as the average career of a referee, that depends on how well their body holds up. All right, some of these referees that are coming in now, the younger referees, are in their later 20s. All right, but we do have some referees that are at about 50 years old, or 51, 52. So as long as they're passing the fitness test, as long as they're maintaining their position and their movement on the field is what we expect, and they're making the correct decisions, all right, then that's somebody that we're going to continue to employ and continue to use. In the end, we want the right decision, all right, and we want the credible decision. And if they're able to do that, and they're able to pass the fitness tests and pass their assessments, then it's somebody that we're going to use. All right, so.
Hey, Mark, there's another question in there. Do you see that one?
My younger brother has an interest in becoming a ref. What are some good starting places? So every referee that we have is either registered through US Soccer or through Canada Soccer. All right, so any person that has interest in refereeing must start there. All right, so if it's Columbus, then you're going to go to US Soccer, and probably the state association. They have Ohio North and Ohio South. All right, so go to, I don't know where Columbus sits in that Ohio South. So if you go to that state referee committee, they'll have information on where to start taking the courses. And the course is basically a classroom course, and then they also have an on-field module that you'll have to pass. All right, and then once you start doing matches, and as a player does, you start moving up the ladder with different levels of matches, and you're constantly evaluated and assessed to see if you're able to handle the next level of games.
And I would say, Tyler, I mean, I would really advocate somebody who's got a love for the game and you know wants to stay involved in the game to give it a go. I mean, not many of us when we're young kids want to be refs. Let's be honest. When I was 7 or 8, I had no ambition to become a ref. I mean, I wanted to be a player, a professional player, a World Cup winning captain for England, not realizing how difficult that ambition would be to achieve being English. But I wanted to win the World Cup, and I realized at the age of about 15 that I wasn't very good, or not as good as I'd hoped I would be. And it was my father who encouraged me to take up the whistle. He said, look, you're not a very good footballer. I said, thank you, Dad. He said, have you thought about doing some refereeing? Because he'd done some refereeing, you know, when he finished playing. And actually at the time I said to him, you know, I'm not really interested, Dad, because when I think about referees in my mind's eye, I think about bald old men, which is what I've become some years later. But it was a good decision to start, because it took me on this journey that took me to over 50 countries. I had the best seat in the house at some of the greatest soccer events in the world. And yes, I would have loved to have been there as a player, but didn't have that God-given talent, no matter how hard I worked. But refereeing was something I could work at. And you do feel the responsibility of a game on your shoulders. You know that you can make a mess of a game, but you also know you can have a positive influence on a game. And the satisfaction that you feel when you come off having controlled a game and nobody's talking about you. That's not your aim. You don't want to be spoken about as a ref. But coming off a game, getting some handshakes, knowing that you've contributed positively is a great feeling, because you know how painful the feeling is when it goes badly and you make an error that's much impactful that you certainly don't want to be making. So I'd recommend that he gives it a go and see where that journey takes him.
Pat, the answer to your question is definitely. As soon as you blow the whistle, all right, many times just on the reaction of the players, the initial reaction, that reaction that's genuine, all right, you know when you may not have seen anything, something correctly. Do you know when you've had a nightmare? When I came off that Panama-Mexico game, I knew it was one of the most difficult games that I ever had. I knew that I made mistakes coming into the locker room, but I didn't know the magnitude of it until I watched the game afterwards. All right, so sometimes you do know, sometimes you don't, but you do get that gut feeling right away many times when a decision isn't necessarily correct, and you're not going to be surprised, especially in MLS, to hear the VAR get into your ear and say that there needs to be an on-field review.
One of the things you do, Pat, when you came off a game, a live TV game as a ref, you'd get a feeling for sure that you've got something wrong. Natural player reaction is really important for a referee to read. I don't mean the orchestrated stuff that, where a player, a tackle goes in and the player thinks it's a red card and he comes running over and he says, "Referee, that's not a yellow card." And he's thinking, "I hope he shows a yellow because I'm thinking it could be red." So we're talking about genuine reaction, but you do get that gut feeling if you've got something wrong, and you're hoping against hope that you might just be right. And on a live TV game, after the game, you go to the locker room, you'll get your mobile phone out, and if you've had a good game, you've got lots and lots of messages. And if you've had a bad one, you've only got one from your mum. Your mum saying something like, "I still love you."
Will someone tell you, correct you during the game? Will you say, "Hey, listen, Howard, Mark, your positioning's not great. You should be higher up the field there," or not to correct you if they see over time you're making the same mistake like a coach would? Sorry, I shouldn't be jumping in.
No, that's fine, and that's part of the assistant referee's job. If you have a really good assistant referee that knows what you normally do out on the field, and you're just not being yourself, or the game has picked up and is much more intense or much more emotion in the game, and they see the referee hasn't risen to that level, then they'll get on the mics and they'll tell you, "Hey, let's pick it up. Or let us know little details that are happening that they're seeing, or things that if we need to tighten it up or we need to relax a little bit." That's communication that does happen between the people on the field.
Nice. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So going into the laws of the game, I think that's something that's really interesting about soccer that you don't see necessarily in other sports, is the amount of subjectivity that you have in the laws of the game. Just until a couple of years ago, you saw all over the law book, in the opinion of the referee. All right, now it says in a manner considered by the referee. So the referee has so much authority and so much influence on the individual decisions. And I think there can be a lot of bias that comes into those decisions as well, based on a referee's culture, based on a referee's experiences. They are the ones that need to decide if this situation that happened is considered a foul or not. Is it enough to whistle? Is it enough to give a penalty? All right, so that's something that's a little bit different that we see in soccer that we may not see in those other sports, where more of those decisions are black and white, whereas they're more subjective in soccer. When we talk about the laws of the game in general, they are changed every single year. All right, there are some additions, there are some extractions that come out, and the IFAB, the International Football Association Board, is in charge of writing the rules. All right, the laws of the game were first developed in the 1800s. All right, and they've changed drastically over the years, and the role of the referee has changed so much. IFAB is made up of England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and then FIFA. All right, but every single league around the world and every single member association like US Soccer or the CSA can make propositions. They can ask for certain things to be changed. They can write up a proposal, put it in, and then it gets considered by IFAB. Many times they experiment with different law changes, and if it's successful, then it's something that they implement and actually make a formal change in the laws of the game. Now, there are 17 laws in the law book. One of them is the ball, one of them is the referee, there's another one for corner kicks, but there's really two laws in the law book that really are the meat and potatoes of soccer. All right, and that could cause a lot of discussion or a lot of confusion. All right, the first one is Law 11. So we're going to talk a little bit on offside, and we'll talk a little bit about fouls. All right, when we talk about offside, there are two components to this law. There's offside position, and then there's actual offside offense. So in this still image, you're in an offside position if when your teammate last touches the ball, you're ahead of the ball, and you're also closer to the goal line than at least two defenders. So if you look at the two players that are circled in red, they're clearly ahead of the ball, which is circled in yellow, and they're clearly ahead of at least two players or two defenders. All right, so these are players that are in an offside position. If you look at that number 9 in the middle that's circled in green, he's okay. All right, because we consider the part of any part of the body on the attacker or defender that they can use to play the ball. All right, and since that defender's foot, the player in white, his foot is closer to the goal line than any part of the body for number 9, the player in blue. All right, this is not an offside position. All right, so he would be able to play the ball next, where the two players circled in red would not be allowed to touch the ball. All right, so but being in an offside position by itself is not a foul, it's not an offense. All right, only after the ball is played by your teammate, if you touch the ball or you impact a defender's ability to play the ball, would you be penalized for being in that offside position. All right, one other thing to put in there is you cannot be penalized for offside if it comes directly from a throw-in, corner kick, goal kick, or if it's last played by a defender. All right, so that basically sums up offside. When you get into the next part of the laws of the game, all right, fouls and misconduct. All right, when we talk about fouls, we can divide them up into two different categories. All right, it's easiest to think of it as contact fouls and non-contact fouls, because how we restart the game is going to be different based on the type of foul that it is. From the referee, when there's a contact foul, which results in a direct free kick or a penalty kick, all right, you'll see the referee just point in the direction of the team that's getting the free kick. For the non-contact fouls, the referee will always also raise their arm above their head. All right, the contact fouls that we have, this is straight from the law book. All right, but if you notice, besides handball, all those others require contact between two players. All right, where handball requires contact with the ball. The non-contact fouls, now playing in a dangerous manner, you're just creating a dangerous situation. Again, no contact. If there's contact, then all of a sudden it's a contact foul or a direct free kick foul. Now, in addition to having to analyze this, all right, whether something is a foul or not, a referee then needs to determine if a yellow card or a red card needs to be issued. A yellow card means caution, and a red card means an ejection, a send-off. All right, so if you receive two cautions, if you receive two warnings, two yellow cards in a game, you're also ejected from the game. A majority of the yellow cards that we see and the red cards that we see fall into two categories. The first one is a severity of the foul. All right, so there's basically three different severities when we have a foul. You can have a simple foul where the referee just awards a direct free kick. All right, you can have the yellow card offense, all right, where it's a little bit higher degree of severity. And then finally, we have that serious foul play, that violent conduct type of situation where a player would be immediately ejected from the game. What a referee needs to look at are these considerations here. They'll look at the point of contact. They'll look at the mode of the contact. So were the studs used or was it the top of the foot? How was it used? So you could be talking about whether it's a straight leg, whether it's a bent leg and they're pulling out of the challenge. All right, talking about speed and force and the intensity of the challenge. So a lot of speed will generate a lot of force. All right, whereas small speed will be a small amount of force, and then they'll look at the opportunity to play the ball. So these are all things that the referee will consider, not only foul or no foul, but where on the spectrum is this foul going to lie? And that will help determine if they need to issue and show a yellow card or a red card to the offending player. The other type of fouls that we see are ones that are designed and break up attacks. All right, we have denying an obvious goal scoring opportunity, more commonly known as dog. So this is really the last man rule that you've heard come into soccer. When you have a player that's going towards goal, they've beaten almost all of the defenders. They only have the goalkeeper to take on. They've got control. And when you see this play developing, if there was no foul, you would imagine that there would be a goal. All right, this is going to be a red card offense if it happens outside the penalty area. All right, a player can get ejected, all right, and sent off for committing a foul that denies an obvious goal scoring opportunity. All right, we have a slightly smaller consequence where if you stop a promising attack. A promising attack are going to be those situations where you could have, or a good likelihood of having, a goal scoring opportunity. So a referee will consider the distance from the goal, the direction that the player is running in, the number of attackers versus defenders, and whether they have control of the ball. And if those factors are all there, like in this picture, that's a Columbus Crew player going down the touchline. He's got a lot of space. He's got other teammates with him. This could create, or this could turn into, a goal scoring opportunity. So in this case, the player in red would be issued a yellow card. The other law that we're going to talk about really quickly, all right, which is probably the most subjective, all right, creates the most controversy, are handballs. All right, it's a weird dynamic. It's a weird sport in that you're not allowed to play with your hands, but every time the ball plays or hits your arm or hits your hand, it's not necessarily a foul. All right, so the things that the referees need to consider is, first, is it deliberate, which means does the hand or arm move to the ball? All right, is the player making themselves unnaturally bigger? So we know what's natural for a player, for the way that they run, the way that they stand, the way that they jump. So the question is, are they making themselves unnaturally bigger by creating that barrier? Very unnatural to have your arm above your shoulder as a player at any point. So if it hits the arm when the arm's above the shoulder, that will be a foul. And then we have a new law that came in with attacker handballs, where we don't want to see it hit the arm of the attacker, and he gets immediate control and then creates that goal scoring opportunity or scores a goal. All right, so these are the things that the referee is going to consider and ask themselves whether any of these things happened, and then does that constitute a handball situation. But basically what it boils down to is if the hand or arm is in a natural position, normally at their side, all right, then we'll have no handball offense, even if the ball hits the arm of that player. This is you, Howard. Yes?
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. I mean, you make offside and handball sound so simple in the space of 5 minutes.
Wish
And
it was.
we debate these things for hours and hours because, as Mark said, so much of it comes down to the referee making a determination in full speed as to whether or not the criteria for handball, for example, or a reckless foul challenge, or a dog-so, denial of obvious goal scoring opportunity, last man, is there. And of course, it creates opinion, creates debate, and we sometimes extend those debates into our Monday calls with coaching staff from clubs, and I have contact with staff from Columbus, not on a too regular basis, but sometimes, you know, it helps to talk about these things and give our rationale and hold our hands up as well when we get something wrong.
Don't act like Pat doesn't call you every week.
Pat calls me every other week, Tim. Every other week. But actually, and Pat's one of the better guys to deal with. You can imagine some who maybe aren't so easy for me on a Monday. But and I'm going to talk about a situation from the DC game actually last year with the disallowing of Pedro Santos' goal. But before we do that, we're going to
don't get me started on that.
I thought I'd sort of like get in there before you could. Yeah. And so the thing about the subjectivity in the game is that, you know, sometimes two people with a lot of experience in the game, either coming from the same background, two coaches, two players, two officials even, can look at the same play and come to a different outcome. They can come to a different opinion about whether or not the decision that was taken was the best decision. Sometimes people can see that, you know, the decision maybe wasn't what they would have liked to see, but they can see why it was given. Sometimes they'll just think it was totally wrong. And the difficulty with the use of VAR is that if you're going to change a subjective call that's kind of 50-50, then are you really using the system for what it's there for? It's there to clear up clear and obvious errors. The situation which gave me sort of like the feeling that we needed VAR, apart from many of my own games, but I was watching France against Ireland in the 2010 World Cup playoff series, and a game in Paris. And with the game tied late in the game, Thierry Henry, who's now the head coach, of course, up in Montreal, used his hand to control the ball. And the referee couldn't see it. The referee was a good friend of mine from Sweden. He couldn't see the handball by Henry, but it was really clear on TV. It was an absolute deliberate and very clear action by Thierry to control the ball and then pass it to a colleague, to William Gallas, who scored for France, and that put France through to the World Cup. So a 2-year campaign for qualification and a huge prize of going to the World Cup had been decided by a handball. And within 10 seconds, we could see at home on TV that Henry had handled the ball, and the referee would be able to see that very quickly as well if given a chance. But everybody at home could see it, but the person who needed to see it, the ref, couldn't. And I felt that was so wrong, you know. And I have had situations myself in my games. The one that we saw earlier with the kick in the chest. It's such a clear red card when you see the proper angle. So we need VAR for those sort of situations. But if it's something more subjective, then we don't want to see it get too involved. We don't want to break the flow of the game too often. We don't want every subjective decision going to the referee's screen at the side of the field. It's going to break the flow and the rhythm of the game that makes it the attractive sport that it is. So trying to get maximum benefit from minimum interference was what we always aimed to do. Of course, we don't always get it right, but in many cases we've seen it be a real positive addition to the game. We only see it being used once every 3 games. And we only use it for the most important situations, which are the ones listed: the direct red cards, penalty kicks and goals, which we think are the match changers, the ones that are talked about for days afterwards, the ones that I get the calls about on a Monday morning more often than not. If you move on to the next slide, Mark, we do pretty well. Before, just looking at those situations I've talked about, goals, red cards and penalties, without VAR, we get over 90% of those correct. Of course, you know, just over 7% of those we get incorrect, which is significant because we're talking about the most important decisions of all. When we use VAR, we get closer to that golden 100%, but we don't quite get there. We don't get there because sometimes the VAR doesn't recommend a review when they should do. They don't think that the threshold for a clear and obvious error has been met, in their opinion, and they're working in real time. They're having to make a decision themselves. Do I intervene or not here? We don't want them to get too involved. If you saw the Women's World Cup, there was quite a lot of use of VAR, and we could see it starting to get too heavily involved and start to cause some irritation. So we don't want that in our sport. Also, sometimes the referee is sent to the screen by the side of the field, and they decide not to change their call. They decide to keep it, and they're wrong to do so. They should change their call. It's about a human opinion at the end of the day. These are human beings. Myself, Mark, and my management team decide whether or not they were right or wrong in getting involved or not in the recommendation, and whether the referee comes out with the final correct decision. But overall, we're seeing a movement towards a higher level of accuracy in those most clear situations that we've spoken about. In MLS, we send the referee to the screen every single time. The feedback we got from our fans in MLS is that they want to see the referee make the final decision. And actually, I think it's really useful for the referee to do that. You know, in some of the competitions, they don't send the referee to the screen. That puts a lot of pressure on the VAR. The VAR needs an even higher level of certainty to get involved, knowing that that decision to recommend a review will result in a decision being changed. Whereas at least now in MLS, the referee gets a chance to say, yes, I agree with you, and sanction the change of decision. And they can also go back to the players on the field and say, I've seen it. I know what I've seen, and you'll see the same things later on that I've seen. So we think it's a good management tool as well for the referee to go to the screen. And we're going to continue trying to push those percentages higher and higher. One of the real positives that we've seen with VAR is in relation to goals, and the fact that every goal is checked and any that are clearly wrong is overturned. So if you go to the next slide, Mark, you'll see, we'll come back to that one, but look at this one first. This one here shows 2019 goal stats in MLS. In 2019, there was over 1,200 goals scored. And every single one of those goals was checked. And people say, you know, you can't really celebrate with VAR when you score a goal because, you know, it could get taken back and, you know, and we have to wait and the referee stands with a finger to the ear while they're being checked. Well, sometimes they do stand there because it takes a bit of time to check a situation. But actually, of all of those goals scored in MLS, only 41 times was the referee sent to the monitor at the side of the field to have a look at whether or not the goal that was scored, or maybe the goal that was incorrectly disallowed, should have been turned over. The decision should have been turned over. So, you know, that's only just over 2% of all goals scored, and 97.85% of goals were allowed to stand, having been checked. And then when we do get to the pitch side monitor and we change a decision, we almost always get to the right decision with goals. So only 3 goals last year were allowed to stand in MLS that should have been cancelled. So that's a real positive, I think, for our sport. A league without VAR, you would see, at least in my opinion, 150 goals being scored incorrectly because it's so fast. Offside situations, handballs, it happens every week where, you know, if you've got a lot of goals being scored, you know, 1,400, a subsection of those will be incorrectly scored simply because it's such a fast game these days and we need VAR. We don't use offside lines in MLS. We don't have enough camera angles to make it consistent across all stadiums. We don't therefore disallow goals for centimeters or millimeters in the way that some competitions do. We think that's a positive, actually, because it means that we're not taking away goals for minutiae. What we do say to the VAR is the on-field decision will be taken by the officials, by the assistant referee. Will keep the flag down, giving benefit of the doubt to the attack where possible, and then have a look at the video. If, when you look at it with your naked eye, if you don't see a clear and obvious error, then just say check complete. We'll just allow the on-field decision to stand unless we can see clearly it's wrong. It does create some dilemma for the VAR sometimes because they'll look at it and say, I think that player could be offside, but do I think strongly enough that they could be offside? Is it clear to me? There is a dilemma there. We say to them, if you've got that dilemma, just say check complete. Yes, sometimes they'll say check complete when, you know, you look at it and you think, I think it's probably offside as well, but can we prove it? Can we prove it? And if we can't, we go back to the on-field decision. So that's how we deal with offside in MLS at the moment. We might end up going to offside lines like you'll see in the Premier League, but our clubs, we visit all the clubs pre-season, they seem fairly okay with this methodology, and we'll keep it until the technology is where it should be. Because at the moment we're not sure it's totally accurate either. You know, there's a kick point where you've got to choose the right frame for the ball being kicked. So I think offside is okay. There was a question on here about is that the most difficult area for VARs, or is it red cards? I think red cards tend to be fairly straightforward. I think red cards stand out. If somebody does something off the ball, it can be clear. If a tackle is made and it's clearly studs onto the shin, it's clear to be a recommendation. The more subjectivity sits around penalties because you've got players holding and pulling and pushing and handball situations where there's a lot of interpretation required by the ref. And, you know, we say to the VARs, unless you've got clear evidence that the on-field decision is wrong, then just say check complete and the decision will be allowed to stand. So I think that's where we probably get the most inconsistencies around penalty kick interventions or not. We don't always get it right. If you go back one slide, Mark, you'll see this famous situation from last year on the DC game against Columbus, where three people came together in midfield. It was Luciano Acosta and Will Trapp and Ted Unkel. Ted got himself into a bad position. He ended up colliding with 2 players. And then Will Trapp went away with the ball, which was kind of fortunate, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't something that he can cancel a goal for. He played in Pedro Santos, who scored to make it 1-0. In the end, DC won this game 3-1 because this goal was overturned after video review. And the reason it was overturned is because when the VAR looked at this, he could see with slow motion, he could see that Will's foot had made contact with Acosta and Acosta had gone down. But it overanalyzed it because when you look at it, the reason that Will Trapp had gone into Luciano Acosta is because Ted Unkel had crashed into both of them. It wasn't a foul by Will. It was one of those unfortunate situations where, you know, the referee gets in the way, and, you know, it was an example of the VAR being too too determined to examine every single bit of minutiae, and we don't want them doing that. We want them looking for the really clear stuff that's obvious, where you look at it once and you say, yep, that should be overturned. This wasn't that type of situation. And we made an announcement about this. We took Ted off his next game, actually. So there is accountability, and the VAR the same as well, because we didn't want it to be seen that there's no accountability in a situation that was match impactful, because this should have gone 1-0 to Columbus, and the game turned on its head really at this point, and DC won the game 3-1. It wasn't a good use of VAR, and I held my hand.
But you know, that's the way it happens. We gotta be stronger, right?
Yeah,
Howard, just really quick, just to answer some of these other questions. David asked about initiatives, some leagues being better testing grounds than others for things like VAR. I think VAR here was very successful in the US and Canada because it's part of our culture. We have a video replay in so many other sports that this was not something that was completely foreign to the general public and to the players even. You know, whereas in other leagues and other cultures, it was a little bit harder for them to embrace and to bring in. You also need to have a league that's very willing to be on the forefront, you know, and willing to bring in these different initiatives and embrace them and try them out. And MLS has done a great job of that, not just with VAR, but with other initiatives as well, willing to put themselves out there and willing to try out these experiments that FIFA or the IFAB wants to experiment with before making it law. So for sure, there are going to be some leagues that are better testing grounds. And Dante, clear and obvious really doesn't necessarily mean the referee should have seen it. A lot of times, like in the Thierry Henry situation, there was no way the referee was going to see that based on the position the referee's expected to be in and where that handball had happened. But clear and obvious should more lead to, when you look at the replay, when anyone looks at the replay, there's not going to be any question or any doubt as to what the decision should be. If it's still a debatable situation, then it's not a clear and obvious error by the referee. All right. But if everyone looks at that video clip and says, yes, that's a penalty, yes, that's a red card, no debate, then that would be a clear and obvious error.
And I think a lot of times you see that with offside. It's like, how are you going to see that his heel was further, his toe was offside? So
that's why we're trying. That's why we're trying to stay away from those situations, and that's something that the lines would force us to do, is to consider those situations.
Yeah, I'm curious what you guys, think about the offside line technology. You know, I know it's had a negative press over in England. I've obviously got a lot of family and friends over there still, but we feel we're in an okay place without using them for now, and it means we can give the benefit of the doubt to the attacking team. Just in case you've ever got an interest, by the way, in seeing the inside workings of VAR, every week on a Friday we post something called Inside Video Review. It's done in English and in Spanish, and it's hosted by Greg Barkey, who's our video review manager, and he plays the more interesting and controversial situations. You can hear the officials talking to each other. He shows you what the VAR is looking at. He talks you through it. We do say when we've done well, we say when we could have done better as well, and it's quite an interesting resource. It's on our website, proreferees.com, every Friday. We'd like to put it out earlier, but unfortunately we have to go through the assessment process, you know, within the terms and conditions of the CBA, and it's only right and proper that the officials get that assessment before we start making things public, unless it's something egregious like the Ted Uncle one when I made a statement on a Monday. And there's a question from Tim as well about fourth officials. The key role of the fourth official, in my opinion, is to be a supporter of the officials for what's happening on the field. In my opinion, they have got the authority in law to be able to identify red card offences, to identify violent conduct or serious foul play, those type of situations. Beyond that, they can also obviously manage the technical area. I always found it a struggle. I was fourth official in the middle of these two heated benches, taking the rap for what the referee is doing on the field, and you're trying to be Kofi Annan. You're trying to manage the expectations and sort of like frustrations of everybody in that technical area, without throwing your colleague under the bus, because you don't want to say, yeah, I agree, he's having a really bad game, and then at half time, the coach says, by the way, your fourth official says you're having a shocking game as well. It's not a good atmosphere in the locker room at half time if you say that. So even though you might think it, so you've got to try to be a positive influence on the benches, lots of empathy, lots of communication. You're there to facilitate the smooth running of substitutions as well, that type of thing. But it's a good learning ground for some of our lesser experienced officials to see the way officials handle things, to learn how to manage people in those environments. It's a quick learning curve as well. But the main job, in my opinion, is to see what's happening on the field and to help the referee not miss anything first and foremost. And then obviously act as a replacement should somebody become injured. That's another role for the fourth official. We've got one more section, Mark, because I know Caleb asked a question about scouting reports, and we've got one section that we're just very quickly going to cover about preparation. And then I think we're pretty much there, aren't we? That's Marky. There you go.
Yes. So once a referee gets an assignment, they receive their assignments 18 to 24 days ahead of the match. All right, then their work starts. All right, one of the things that they're going to be doing, one of the things that they're expected to do is watch games. All right, so they're going to certainly focus in on those matches that involve teams that they're going to see in the next few weeks. We also, on that platform that I showed you before, that Pro House, we do have a section where we do have a scouting report that's put into place for every single team in the league. Also, all 26 teams have a scouting report. Within there, we talk about set pieces. How do they defend and how do they attack with set pieces? We talk about what their formations look like. We talk about key players. We talk about all different things that will benefit a referee or help a referee decide how the game is going to play out. One of the more important things for a referee to get a decision right is to be in the correct position. All right, so if they know the style of play, if they know how a team is going to defend, if they know how they're going to attack, that's going to help them predict what's going to happen next to get to that optimal position with the good angle, with the proximity to make that credible decision. The day before, they always have a match prep workout that they do. All right, they will check the fields. They come to the stadium 2 hours before the match starts. All right, they check the field to make sure all the markings are correct, or the goals are placed properly, and everything is where it's supposed to be. Also, part of that is to get the VAR set up properly with the communication devices and everything synced up. All right, and then the referee will meet with his crew. All right, we'll go over what the expectations are from a logistics standpoint, go over expectations of the type of communication that referee expects to have from the rest of their crew, and then talk about the specific matchups that we're going to see, whether it's going to be individual players or groups of players, or what to expect in that particular match. All right, so there is a lot of preparation that goes in. They just don't show up, go to the pitch with their whistle and flags, and then just start the game and walk home afterwards. All right, so there is a lot of preparation that goes into each game. The scouting reports that we have 2 people on staff that put those things together, and they are updated on a continual basis. So they're watching all the games as well, and they're helping the referees come up with these scouting reports and helping them prepare mentally and from a tactical standpoint and a physical standpoint for the matches.
And those analysts that we have, they come from a club background, so they've got knowledge of formations and modern techniques and what have you. We don't try to focus on players that are necessarily going to dive in the game. People ask us that and that sort of thing. We don't look for that type of thing. We expect our officials to have good knowledge across all of the teams in the league and the participants in the league, but we also expect them to go into a game with an open mind. But having knowledge is good, but going there with an open mind, so they're able to deal fairly with everybody, but have got an awareness of where the problem areas might be in that particular game. It's sensible to do that. You'd expect us to go in fully prepared, understanding where the problem areas are likely to be, but with enough mental agility to be able to adjust your game plan as you're going through the game. And refereeing, at the start of a game, you try to keep the game fairly tight because you don't know what type of game it's going to be. But if you keep it tight for too long, if you're whistling for every small contact, you start to frustrate people and you end up making the game difficult that otherwise might not be. So the art of being a good referee is about being able to recognise the ebb and flow of the game, when you need to increase your involvement, when you can relax your involvement, how to communicate to players so they're prepared to cooperate with you. They're things that good referees will do to maintain control of the game and allow the players to play and not cause unnecessary issues. I think, and then the question from Tyler, Mark, when a red card is given after VAR, who has the final say, the ref on the field or the VAR ref? it's always the referee that has the final say. We make that easy in MLS because the referee always goes to the screen and they make the final decision, having seen something with their own eyes. In some other competitions, such as in the Premier League, well, certainly when it started, they would simply accept information over the earpiece from the VAR who sat at a centre somewhere else, and they would accept it without going to the screen. They felt that was, and that's okay within the protocol, you can do that, but because they felt it would be more efficient without having to send the referee to a screen to watch the footage again, then come back, which is going to take another minute or so. They felt it was a better way of doing it. But I think we're seeing some changes gradually where people are wanting the referee to make the final say. In our competition, that always happens. The centre ref is the one who makes the final decision on every situation. And we think that's the best way to proceed in our competition.
Hey, Howard, Mark. So I know that we're over time, and I'm not sure how much you had left. So I wanted to be cognizant of your time. Obviously, it's been...
That's my next slide.
I've got nowhere to go, Dante. You've got nowhere to go. I've been sat in this apartment for 6 weeks on my own. We've got until a week on Thursday if you want. I'm sure everybody else is bored by now.
No. I would say that this has been fantastic. I mean, the experience that both of you have, you just don't get that every day. And being able to hear from such seasoned professionals like yourself is a great opportunity for us. So we definitely want to extend our heartfelt thank you.
Mark and Howard, obviously it's, we have a wide spectrum of people who jumped on today, but every time I listen to either one of you or anyone on this topic, you're always learning, and there's always new ways, as you said, to see the grays in the game, and you see how subjective it is and how difficult it is, and you have the hardest jobs in the game, frankly. So we even though we don't always you don't feel that from us, you know that we do appreciate it, and I'm not sure Pat or Caleb will admit to that now, but they certainly do appreciate it. So, but really appreciate this. It's hard. It's been a hard time for everyone, every club, and I'm sure that you guys are itching to get back and get the game going again, but really appreciate your time on a Friday afternoon like this on behalf of the club.
Thanks, Tim. That's much appreciated, and thanks
Absolutely.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys. It's great to connect like this. We very much think there's benefit to be had from humanising our group and spending time like this to share what we do and answer any questions. So thanks for that opportunity. And you're the only club that's reached out. I think that's indicative of the way that you approach things at Columbus. And thanks for inviting us into that world.
All right. Stay safe, guys. And
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thanks again, Howard.
Thanks, guys.